Harvest. 1. Harvest is a noun.
1. Countable noun, uncountable noun, the time when crops are gathered from the fields, or the act of gathering them.
At harvest. At harvest time. Every year at harvest time. Wheat harvest. Rice harvest. Grape harvest.
It rained for the potato harvest. 2. Countable noun, the crops that have been gathered, or the amount and quality of the crops gathered.
Good harvest equals a lot of crops. Bumper harvest equals a lot of crops. Poor harvest equals few crops. Bad harvest equals few crops. Plum growers are expecting a bumper harvest this year. 3. Reap a harvest. To get good or bad results from your actions. 2. Harvest is a verb.
1. Intransitive verb, to gather crops from the fields. 2. Transitive verb, to take or collect for use, especially to take a part of someone's body to put into someone else's body. His family has given permission for his organs to be harvested.
Harvest is a countable noun or an uncountable noun.
Meaning of harvest in English. The time of year when crops are cut and collected from the fields, or the activity of cutting and collecting them, or the crops that are cut and collected. The rice harvest. The wheat harvest. The grain harvest. The potato harvest. The grape harvest. More examples. 1. We had a good harvest this year. 2. Farmers are reporting a bumper equals very big harvest this year. 3. It won't be long now till harvest time. 4. With the harvest finished, I was able to relax with an easy mind. 5. With the harvest finished, I was able to relax with an easy conscience. 6. The drought has made farmers anxious about the harvest. 7. How many extra hands will we need to help with the harvest? 8. The long hot summer has led to a record harvest this year. 9. This year's harvest was one of the most successful since the record crop of 1985. 10. Who is the first fruit of a harvest of blessings to come? 11. As a result of several bumper harvests, the country now has a grain surplus. 12. Spraying is necessary, particularly against fungal diseases, to have a decent harvest of nice-looking fruit every year. 13. Meanwhile, the domestic harvest continues apace, with 72% of the crop gathered. 14. It should be a good harvest this year. 15. The heavy frosts had ended hopes of a good harvest that year. 16. The main harvest will be in July and August, however. 17. Slower varieties maturing in 2 months or more need to be sown in July to ensure a lengthy October harvest.
18. This year's olive harvest was the best since the war.
19. Recent harvests have been short and not enough trees have been planted for the future. 20. As California's harvests begin next month, one's plight will highlight a nation's shame. 21. Even the youngest children would come and help to get the harvest in. 22. The harvest was reported on September 19 as being 40 million tons down on the amount at the same time in 1990. 23. The harvest is usually ready in July or August. 24. September is usually harvest time. 25. You should go at rice harvest, she said. 26. Despite an 11% increase in the 1995 California grape harvest, wine prices for consumers will still go up. 27. An excellent rice harvest caused prices to plummet by 40%. 28. But after 3 relatively small grape harvests in a row coupled with continuing strong consumer demand, grape prices continue to increase.
29. August brought the grape harvest, centered in Fresno. 30. By the 1880s half the wheat harvest was being exported. 31. This led to a famine and a delay in the wheat harvest of 2 months. 32. It was estimated that 20% of the grape harvest had been lost.
33. They were harvested a year before the experiments took place.
34. Unlike the routine for the main trapping grid, these traps remained untended for 3 consecutive days before flies were harvested. 35. 13 chapters cover taxonomy and distribution, production volumes, ecology and agronomy, harvesting, processing, economics and marketing. 36. We used these series to predict harvest time prices of each crop for the month in which the harvest was reported to have taken place. 37. It is sufficiently fast and accurate to be used by seed producers for establishing an optimal harvest time to obtain high-quality seed lots. 38. The total number of plants and ears were counted in each plot at the time of harvest. 39. The same rates of fertilizer were used at planting and after harvest for both cropping cycles. 40. The effect might not appear very strong because of the scale used in the harvest series.
41. The lowest maize yield harvested in 1996/1997 under Sol maize was attributed to leaching and waterlogging due to excessive rainfall and lodging.
42. Moreover, mature trees ready for harvest may be grown for historical, socioeconomic, and geographical reasons, rather than due to the management effort. 43. This is mainly because renewable assets such as biological resources grow over a length of time before they mature and become ready for harvesting. 44. Swathed forages were sampled near the time they were swathed or harvested. 45. The long harvests, moreover, encroached on the time available for between crop repairs and maintenance. 46. When a household has earned enough money on, for example, the apricot harvest, there is no need to sell last summer's lambs.
47. There are very few fields which offer so important and rich a harvest to scientific enterprise. 48. A different situation arose with regard to harvested crops.
49. This determines how much seed must be set aside from each year's harvest for next year's seed, and thus, how much is available for consumption. 50. 9 of the self-harvesters believed they invested more cash in the subplot than the value of the harvest yields, and 14 believed they invested less. 51. As soon as these cover crops were harvested, they were soil incorporated together with one of several organic amendments. 52. At harvest, however, pest densities did not significantly vary between treatments. 53. The study of the biology suggested that infestation might be checked by delaying harvesting until after the larvae hatched.
54. Immediately prior to harvest, a 3 square meters (m2) area was dug from each subplot and the plants counted and topped by hand. Poor/bad harvest. 55. A poor harvest in 842, and the imminence of winter, strengthened their determination. 56. Briars and thorns grow rank where in army camps. Bad harvests are the sequence of a great war. 57. Farming methods in this area of Moldavia haven't changed for decades and the primitive machinery has meant poor harvests. 58. But a succession of bad harvests has sent the price of this most popular bubbly soaring. 59. In addition, there had been several successive bad harvests, and a phylloxera epidemic which devastated the vineyards. 60. Then there was a long drought which produced a very poor harvest. 61. The unfairness lay in the fact that these very poor harvests were mainly the result of natural causes. 62. And the cycle of bad weather, poor harvests, high prices and malnutrition looked all set to repeat itself. Examples of abundant harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of abundant or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with harvest. 63. He failed to reap the abundant harvest offered by the manifold variety of actual life, and thus deprived the economic historian of indispensable material. 64. The winner would ensure abundant harvest for his village. 65. We all remember that 2 or 3 years ago Providence blessed us with an abundant harvest of plums. 65. In its early years it was for an abundant harvest and occasionally for a special anniversary. 66. Within 10 days all the zifang had disappeared, so the locality had an abundant harvest. 67. In the past such rites included agricultural rites, such as prayers for abundant harvest. 68. These often contain messages of good fortune, family reunion, abundant harvest, prosperity and love. 69. The plants may take 3 or 4 years to produce an abundant harvest. 70. As goddesses of wealth, both deities have a similar iconography and are worshipped for their role in an abundant harvest. 71. Most representations show her holding a sheaf of corn in her left hand, symbolizing an abundant harvest.
72. Wild foodstuffs include maguey, nopal cactus, pitaya fruit, yuccas and more, which usually give a more abundant harvest once every 4 years.
73. There is this year 200 acres of potatoes, 300 acres of corn, and the balance in barley, all of which promises an abundant harvest. 74. Dances were organized around the smoky fire to symbolically ward off the invisible beings of evil, to have an abundant harvest and good hunting that year. 75. Remarkable for its abundant harvest and the unusually high quality of wine produced, some of the vintage's best examples were being enjoyed over a century later.
Examples of annual harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of annual or the definition of harvest. Or see other combinations with harvest.
77. A concessionaire who is effectively, though not necessarily legally, free to choose annual harvest area thus might not be equally free to choose annual harvest volume. 78. Annual harvest is estimated at 385,000 tons, worth over $350 million. 79. Given the annual harvest constraint of 40,000 cubic meters, sustained yield management is thus close to privately optimal in the absence of area and harvest fees. 80. The data record the harvested production per unit of harvested area for crop products based on the annual harvest data and the area harvested. 81. Given that annual harvest volume is fixed, however, the reduction in concession life necessarily causes harvest intensity to fall. An increase in the area fee causes high grading. 82. Its annual harvest varies quite considerably and its price also fluctuates greatly. 83. He also initiated the publishing of annual harvest statistics. 84. The island's 45-acre of clam flats generate an average annual harvest of some $225,000.
85. It is also part of the annual harvest festival on the island.
86. The city boasts its mango products at an annual harvest festival showcasing its world-renowned produce. 87. Fisheries scientists decide the maximum annual harvest in a certain fishery, accounting for carrying capacity, regeneration rates, and future values. 88. Initten's records in the early 1980s were 83,000 bunches. The majority of the 2 million verticordia stems in an annual harvest that sometimes permanently damaged the shrubs.
Examples of bountiful harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of bountiful or the definition of harvest. Or see other combinations with harvest.
89. We had a report that it was a bountiful harvest. 90. In an increasingly predatory global market, it could mean the difference between a bountiful harvest and a visit from the Grim Reaper. 91. It only required a bountiful harvest to make the demands acute. 92. Replacing empty lots with a bountiful harvest creates community pride. 93.
People then start celebrating together for the bountiful harvest. 94. This is also a Thanksgiving feast for the bountiful harvest given to the farmers every year. 95. His spirit is concentrated, saving things from corruption and bringing a bountiful harvest every year. 96. The Caligpare must be appeased, to ensure a bountiful harvest. 97. The object of the festival is to pray for a bountiful harvest in the coming year. 98. In this dance, they supplicate the Dewata for a bountiful harvest. 99. The original festival was held in order to appease typhoons and allow for a bountiful harvest of rice. 100. It symbolizes the household's wish for an abundance of nature and a bountiful harvest for the upcoming year. 101. Oxen came out of the sea, bountiful harvest, and birds, glory of the king to be born. 102. The taganko is also played in ceremonies called Kalalang Sa Ton to appeal to the spirits for a bountiful harvest or for a rich catch of fish. Examples of commercial harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of commercial or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with harvest. 103. Commercial harvest of salmon first took place in the Kuskokwim area in 1913, although in the early years it was a quasi-commercial fishery with limited distribution. 104. Thereafter, seeds were collected at weekly intervals until commercial harvest time. 105. Germination percentages were the highest in dry seeds collected at the commercial harvest time and a week after. 106. Also, in the present experiments, the quality of the seeds harvested at commercial harvest time was higher than that of the early harvested seeds. 107. Nevertheless, even for the seeds harvested at the commercial harvest time, the germination capacity was lower than is characteristic for commercial lots, which is usually over 90%. 108. From 2004 to 2008, the annual commercial harvest increased from 80,000 to 200,000 tons. 109. The commercial harvest is performed during a very short season, and the catch is shipped worldwide. 110. Commercial harvest in the area was as much as 3.5 million pounds. 111. Its populations declined drastically, and in the early 1980s, it was designated an endangered species and commercial harvest was banned. 112. This population was nearly eradicated by commercial harvest. Their current numbers, though difficult to estimate, probably remain below 20,000. 113. There has been no commercial harvest in the area since 1988 with the exception of a brief harvest in 1993. 114. There is a fear that this plant may be targeted for commercial harvest in the pharmaceutical echinacea trade, but there is little evidence of this threat so far. Examples of grain harvest.
These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of grain or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with harvest or grain. 115. There is a huge number of the most different types of grain harvesters, each of which is suitable under these or other conditions, and has its advantages and disadvantages. Let's look at each of the species in more detail.
116. I had a moderate grain harvest. Moderate because we did not get the rain needed when the heads should swell but got all the rain at harvest time. 117. During this season, the crops of the grain harvest were collected. 118. Rain finally came late in the season and produced a good grain harvest, but the drought continued the next year. 119. The grain harvest was badly affected, and creative solutions to make the flour last longer were introduced. 120. This will eventually lead to water scarcity and cutbacks in grain harvest. 121. Standing grain crop dry matter following grain harvest was determined from 0.15 or 1 m areas, 3 areas in unraised plots and 5 areas in grazed plots. 122. The grain harvest area was 4.5 square meters. 123. Thus, because the grain harvest was mechanized even as it shrank substantially after 1880, simply counting reapers will progressively understate the trend away from hand methods, whereas this reflects it. 124. Without the help of that section of the population in the grain harvest, we should be in a very difficult position indeed. 125. There is no question of young children doing the work of the grain harvest. 126. The mild winter, coupled with a good grain harvest last year, appears to have greatly improved the livestock farmers' situation. 127. The best available evidence we have suggests that, after a record grain harvest, there exists sufficient food for all. 128. We want 12,000, for instance, in relation to the grain harvest, and so on.
129. By the grain harvest this year we expect to have 31,000 prisoners of war, and by the potato harvest, 35,000.
130. I spoke about the employment of children in one area on the grain harvest. 131. The situation was helped by the fact that the grain harvest was light and was got in during extremely good weather conditions. 132. We had a record grain harvest last year, and it is clear that one of the ways to obtain cheaper food is to increase production. 133. We expect 31,000 by the end of the grain harvest and 35,000 by the end of the potato harvest. 134. Those farmers in 2 counties asked for 2,100 more laborers than they have at present for getting in the grain harvest. 135. We thought of that, too, but the grain harvest is always a good many weeks earlier than the potato harvest. Examples of poor harvest.
These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of poor or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with harvest. 136. The poor harvest of 1682 to 1683 brought with it famine conditions which weakened the exhausted population even further.
137. During years of poor harvest, cattle can be traded for money or other goods. 138. The last really poor harvest year in the 50-year span for which there are price data was 1712. 139. The poor harvest of 2001 to 2002, which triggered the most recent famine, had been preceded by a bumper harvest.
140. That is a dramatic increase, despite a relatively poor harvest. 141. What already promised to be a poor harvest was then followed by an early snowfall that buried the crop before it could be harvested. 142. In years following a poor harvest, however, when households were not food secure, they were more risk-averse and continued to use a calendar spray regime. 143. This would imply that births occurring during poor harvest years did not significantly contribute to deaths either as a result of infant or of maternal mortality. 144. I recognize the effect upon investment of last year's poor harvest. 145. The current food price increases can be blamed partly on the poor harvest. 146. The increase coincided with a poor harvest, causing severe hardship. 147. Yet another poor harvest in 2008 could lead to a food supply shortage that no one ever thought was possible. 148. The whole position is bedeviled by the fact that there was a very poor harvest last year. 149. We cannot go through the same sequence of events every year, where erratic rainfall leads to a poor harvest, which leads to a food crisis. 150. Oats likewise yielded a very poor harvest, and the hay failed altogether. 151. Sales, including some exports at low prices, continued in 2001 despite a poor harvest. 152. Poor harvest and low vegetation is related to non-availability of nutrients in the sandy soil. 153. In addition, 1816 was unusually wet and cold, producing a very poor harvest. 154. The original meaning of the boycotts had been about the poor harvest in 1901. 155. Stocks are lower than usual at present because of a poor harvest last year, but no difficulties are foreseen in providing adequate supplies to the market.
156. This has resulted in shorter supplies of hay, which is of poor quality, and a poor harvest of grain, which is of low quality and quantity. 157. But unless we grasp that nettle, we are putting a burden upon manufacturing and commercial industry in this country which will reap for us a poor harvest. 158. It is harsh to campaign during summer farming season, as it will result in poor harvest for the populace. 159. Adding to this concern, a poor harvest in late summer led many to worry about the possibility of starvation.
Examples of rice harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of rice or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with rice or harvest.
160. The problem is serious because there is very little turnaround time between rice harvest and wheat sowing. 161. As a result of this, the rice harvest was poor, with probably a 25% reduction in quantity on former years. 162. One realizes the degree of poverty, especially in the circumstances of drought, when the rice harvest is disappearing. 163. The rice harvest of 1941 to 1942, that which is gathered at the beginning of the calendar year, was exceptionally good, was definitely in excess of local requirements. 164. Its ceremonial significance is associated with a ritual of thanksgiving associated with the rice harvest.
165. It is also a celebration among rice farmers before the rice harvest. 166. The 1972 rice harvest amounted to only 26.8% of the 1969 harvest. 167. Almost every locale has at least one matsuri in late summer/early autumn, usually related to the rice harvest. 168. Elsewhere, over 300 boats and 3,000 homes and buildings were destroyed and the storm severely damaged much of the rice harvest. 169. After the rice harvest, the heavy agricultural work is finished, giving way to the dry season. 170. The rice harvest was the lowest in 23 years, due to the storm and a government effort to limit production.
171. The prawn seedlings, which swim in from the sea and the backwaters after the rice harvest, feed on the leftovers of the harvested crop. 172. In most rice-producing countries, they are used for threshing and for transporting the sheaves during the rice harvest. 173. Part of the rice harvest is grilled, ground, and winnowed, a ritual preparation for the upcoming celebration. 174. Traditionally, villages rely on forest products as a food reserve during years of poor rice harvest and as a regular source of fruits and vegetables. 175. Other Dasunic groups, the Murutic groups of the interior and the Paitanic groups in the east have different rice harvest rituals.
176. The water acts as the stage for the puppets, and as a symbolic link to the rice harvest. 177. About 1.47 million households lost power, and widespread crop damage occurred, resulting in the poorest rice harvest in 23 years. 178. There were also annual fall wild rice harvest festivals.
Examples of rich harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of rich or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with harvest.
179. What happens now, after the rich harvest of the decade of the brain? 180. Their own country was yielding an equally rich harvest of astonishing marvels. 181. Salmon is a very rich harvest. 182. What a rich harvest has resulted. 183. Their volume, containing pieces by 8 others besides contributions and an introduction by themselves, is a rich harvest. 184. Why should other countries reap this rich harvest? 185. The texts of popular songs may bring a rich harvest of deviant spelling, but they don't come under the same linguistic category as dialect imitation or newspaper editorials. 186. It is pure hypocrisy to talk about the rich harvest for the landlords. 187. A rich harvest of alternatives to corporal punishment has been gleaned. 188. Those individual contributions provided the teams with a rich harvest of reforming ideas. 189. I am convinced that this will result in a rich harvest for the lawyers. 190. If we were more sensible and rational about this, we would reap an enormously rich harvest. 191. His letters, especially, promise a rich harvest. 192. Or has it gone down the drain altogether, while we still allow this rich harvest to be made? 193. It is such a rich harvest that they can reap as a result of their illegal trawling. 194. It is a rich harvest, but one which at present is at some risk from our priorities and our own aid policy in this field. 195. I do not wish to express my congratulations to the legal fraternity, but it seems to me that they will reap a rich harvest.
196. After the first week, it yielded quite a rich harvest of suggestions, though not always perhaps the kind of suggestion that we had anticipated. 197. I think we could reap a rich harvest by going out and claiming their scientists in return for those which have been taken from us. 198. There is also the question of revenue from the rich harvest of fish and the possibility there can be no certainty of finding oil. 199. Those who engage in illegal trawling make a rich harvest in a voyage or two, if they escape detection and get away with their haul. 200. She prevents the natural disasters for people, and brings the rich harvest in the town. 201. Thereafter, he went on to produce a rich harvest of varied stories. 202. Sprouting seminy symbolizes sowing and a rich harvest. It represents grain, bread, increase, and abundance.
Examples of timber harvest. These words are often used together. You can go to the definition of timber or the definition of harvest. Or, see other combinations with harvest.
203. Annual timber harvest volumes, in cubic meters, procurement prices and market prices, in yuans per cubic meter, were collected from local timber companies. 204. Table 2 shows the levels of timber harvest and forest cover for 2 sample provinces in each region for 2 critical years, 1977 and 1987. 205. The formulation of a timber harvest plan involves important economic and sustainability criteria, amongst others. 206. This would raise more money through premium and royalty collection from timber harvest and charcoal production.
207. They began with the goal of simply reducing the timber harvest. 208. During the same period, the annual timber harvest doubled, the annual fish catch tripled, and the country discovered, and developed, huge reserves of natural gas. 209. We see that timber harvest, stocking volume and forest area in the north grew at an annual rate of 18.9, 7.5 and 11.2% respectively. 210. However, we have the flexibility of being able to look into changes in timber harvest and forest area to calibrate our results and draw our conclusions. 211. For example, while 55% of villages regulate timber harvest and 1/3 control grazing, less than 10% explicitly restrict fuelwood and fodder collections. 212. Perhaps we could increase our timber harvest through that policy, but it would be a marginal or modest improvement. 213. Variability in daily activity patterns has been linked to activity of major prey species, foraging efficiency, gender, reducing exposure to extreme temperatures, and timber harvest. 214. The prolific growth of this species after timber harvest inhibits reforestation by competing with seedling trees.
215. This includes timber harvest rules, environmental regulations, firefighting practices, and management priorities for use of state-owned forest lands. 216. The accumulated parcels were then sold in large blocks to the highest bidder for timber harvest. 217. Salmon habitat can be degraded by many different factors including land development, timber harvest, or resource extraction. 218. However, that national forest's timber harvest increased to 81,200,000 board feet per year by 1952.
219. The resultant reduction in timber harvest contributed to the closure of sawmills and the layoff of loggers and other workers. 220. Accordingly, EGAP forests cannot sustain timber harvest. 221. Along this 2.5 miles trail, you'll be in a second growth forest, where the trees had once been removed for farming or timber harvest. 222. In addition to irrigated agriculture, the major economic driving forces include timber harvest and processing, cattle, and outdoor recreation. Harvest is a verb and some examples. 1. Despite increases in yield per acre, that has led to a steady decline in the amount of dates harvested. 2. Key to the measures is testing for the fungus before each field is harvested. 3. For Ken Stanier, who's been harvesting apples for 40 years, it's good news. 4. Cantaloupes needed to be harvested in the Imperial Valley in May. 5. The group scatters to harvest the guavas. 6. Once again this autumn, I lost the race with the squirrels to harvest the hazelnuts. 7. And like the swallows that harvest the thin fields of air, we must become harvesters of ever more intangible fields. 8. Harvest tip: instead of harvesting the whole cabbage, cut the head leaving a short stump.
Thank for watching.
Thank for watching.